Hey everybody, so we're going to talk today about nicotine, and we'll focus on what nicotine is, how it works, how is it used, the dependence of it, withdrawals, health effects, and recovery. So the first question, what is nicotine? Well, nicotine is a highly addictive stimulant drug naturally produced by the tobacco plant. And when we're going through how this is going to work, again, natural. Natural doesn't mean not addictive. So it is the primary, nicotine is the primary addictive chemical in cigarettes, cigars, pipe tobacco, hookah or shisha tobacco, vapes and e-cigarettes, which contain nicotine pouches, and some smokeless tobacco products. Snuff is one of them. But nicotine isn't what causes most of the cancer associated with smoking. The enormous additional danger of cigarettes comes from thousands of chemicals produced or present in tobacco smoke, including many toxic and dangerous substances. See, but nicotine is extremely important because it's the chemical that helps drive and maintain dependence. So what is it made of? Well, pure nicotine is a chemical compound. I'll give you the scientific formula. It's C10H14N2. Please don't ask me to break that down. I'm not a scientist. Okay, but it's an alkaloid naturally produced by tobacco plants. But a cigarette isn't simply nicotine. All right. A conventional cigarette contains tobacco plus numerous other ingredients and chemicals. When it burns, the smoke contains thousands of chemicals, including carbon monoxide and numerous substances capable of damaging cells and organs. Vape liquids, however, are a little bit different. A typical nicotine-containing vape liquid may contain things like nicotine, propylene glycol, vegetable glycerine, flavoring chemicals, and other ingredients depending on the product. The exact composition varies a lot between those products. So how is nicotine used? Well, nicotine can enter the body in several ways. One is obviously it's smoking. Nicotine-containing smoke is inhaled into the lungs, and nicotine can reach the brain within seconds, which is the reason why cigarettes are so reinforcing. Vaping, nicotine-containing aerosol is inhaled. So modern nicotine salts can allow relatively high nicotine concentrations to be inhaled with less harshness than traditional free-based nicotine. Then you have oral products, where nicotine can be delivered through pouches, chewing tobacco, snuff, nicotine gum, lozenges. There's a list. Then you have medical nicotine replacement, with things like nicotine patches, gum, lozenges. They're all used therapeutically to help people stop smoking. And that's an important distinction because nicotine replacement therapy provides nicotine without the toxic combustion products found in cigarette smoke. So now the question, what does nicotine do to the brain? And this is where nicotine becomes really fascinating. I really enjoyed researching this stuff. Nicotine binds to something called nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the brain. That stimulates the release of several neurotransmitters, including dopamine. And we all know what dopamine is. Dopamine is your reward, your motivation, your learning, and your reinforcement systems. Dopamine's a big guy. So the brain begins learning that nicotine equals reward. And because nicotine reaches the brain so fast when smoked or vaped, the association can become extremely strong. So why does someone keep going back to nicotine? Well, imagine the scenario. You smoke. You get a nicotine hit. And your brain goes, whoo, that helped. And then later on, you experience stress, you experience boredom, anxiety, anger, concentration difficulties, social pressure. And the brain remembers that cigarette. So you get the trigger, which invokes the craving, which is nicotine. You get the temporary relief and reward from the cigarette or the vape or however you get that nicotine in your body. Repeat that hundreds or thousands of times and the behavior becomes deeply conditioned. If eventually the person may not even consciously think that they want nicotine, they just simply reach for the cigarette. So what about tolerance and dependence? Well, with repeated nicotine exposure, the brain adapts. And we know this with many, many drugs. The person may find that the same amount doesn't produce the same subjective effect as per norm. All right? And that is called tolerance. Dependence develops as the brain becomes accustomed to nicotine. When nicotine levels fall, withdrawal can appear. And this creates one of addiction's nastiest tricks. The person may smoke another cigarette, not because it makes them feel amazing, but because it makes them feel normal again. And what does nicotine withdrawal feel like? Well, withdrawal can begin relatively soon after stopping, very, very quickly. Common symptoms include very strong cravings, irritability, restlessness, anxiety, difficulty in concentrating, low mood swings, increased appetite, sleep patterns get disturbed, frustration, headaches. For many people, these cravings come in waves. That's why someone can genuinely want to quit at 8 a.m. and be thinking, just one cigarette by the time lunchtime arrives. That craving doesn't necessarily mean the person has changed their mind. It just means their brain has learned a powerful association that nicotine equals reward. So what does smoking do to the body? And this is where we need to separate nicotine from tobacco smoke. Because smoking tobacco exposes the body to toxic chemicals and carcinogens. Okay? Smoking increases the risk of things like lung cancer, heart disease, strokes, COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, respiratory disease, numerous types of cancers, pregnancy complications for women that are pregnant and smoking, and premature death. Smoking also damages blood vessels and reduces the amount of oxygen available to the tissues in the body. You have carbon monoxide in cigarette smoke, which binds strongly to your hemoglobin, reducing the blood's ability to carry oxygen. So while nicotine is reinforcing the addiction, the smoke itself is doing the enormous damage. What about you vapors? We are vapors now. What about vaping? Well, there is a very important conversation because people sometimes hear that vaping is harmless because there's no smoke. That is not accurate, and if I've hurt your feelings, I don't care. Okay? For adults who already smoke, switching completely from combustible cigarettes to vaping, it may reduce exposure to harmful chemicals compared with continuing to smoke cigarettes. But that doesn't mean that vaping is harmless, and I wish we could get this into people's heads. Nicotine vaping will still maintain nicotine dependence. It will produce withdrawal symptoms. It will affect cardiovascular functions. It will expose the lungs to potentially harmful substances. And it will keep the addiction cycle alive. And for someone who has never smoked, starting nicotine vaping creates a dependence that didn't previously exist. So to all you vapors out there, come at me, bro. Those are facts. But why is nicotine so hard to quit? See, nicotine addiction has two sides. It's got your chemical dependence, where the brain has adapted to nicotine. And then it's got your behavioral conditioning, where the person associates nicotine with hundreds of situations. For example, you have a cup of coffee with a cigarette. After food, you want to have a cigarette. While you're driving, you have a cigarette. Stressed out, have a cigarette. You're drinking, you have a cigarette. You have a break at work, you have a cigarette. You're socializing, you have a cigarette. All of that makes sense. Excuse me. So you see, quitting isn't simply removing nicotine. You're also breaking a network of learned habits. So now the question is, how difficult is recovery? Well, there isn't one reliable percentage rate, like I said about alcohol, that applies to every nicotine user. But nicotine dependence is well known for high relapse rates, especially when someone tries to quit without support. Is there good news? Well, there are treatments that substantially improve the odds of quitting successfully. Evidence-based approaches include nicotine replacement therapy, where there's patches, gums, lozenges, which are readily available these days. You get prescription medications depending on the person and medical suitability. There's medications such as, I think it's called Varenicline or bupropion, which can be considered medically. Obviously, there's behavioral support, counseling, quit programs, support groups, and identifying triggers can obviously help significantly. The strongest approach for many people combines medication with behavioral support. But something that I learned is if you're in rehab and you're drinking, don't try quit smoking at the same time. All right. That is just something that I've learned and I've seen, and do one first. The body, so what happens to your body after quitting, now that I got sidetracked? Well, the body begins recovering surprisingly fast. Over time, carbon monoxide levels fall after stopping smoking. Your cardiovascular risk decreases. Lung function and respiratory systems can improve. The risk of several cancers decreases over the years. And the risk of premature death falls compared to when you continue smoking. The exact timeline will vary, but the important message is it's not pointless to quit. Whether someone has smoked for 5 years or 50 years, stopping can provide meaningful health benefits. So what's the recovery trap? Okay. Nicotine addiction has another interesting connection to recovery from other substances. Someone might say it's only one cigarette. And perhaps compared with things like heroin, alcohol, or methamphetamines, it might appear insignificant, that one cigarette. But addiction doesn't need to look dramatic to be real. The question is, can I stop when I choose? If the answer is no, that is worth examining. And for somebody recovering from another addiction, nicotine can also become a substitute behavior, something that temporarily fills the emotional behavioral space left by another substance. And I've seen that when I was in rehab. I knew a guy, quit drinking, he was in rehab, he started smoking. So that doesn't mean everyone in recovery has to quit nicotine immediately, like I just said before we got to this part. It just means we should understand the role that it is playing. My recovery message for nicotine: well, nicotine is a powerful example of something that teaches us an important lesson about addiction. It doesn't need to destroy your entire life before it deserves attention. Sometimes addiction looks like, I know I should stop, but I keep doing it. That's the warning sign. And recovery isn't about being ashamed because you became dependent. It's about understanding why your brain keeps asking for something your mind has decided it no longer wants. The cigarette doesn't have the final say. The vape doesn't have the final say. You can teach the brain a new pattern. The first cigarette may have been a choice, but eventually the cigarette becomes a demand. Recovery is learning how to make that choice again. And my key takeaway to finish is that nicotine doesn't just create a chemical dependence. It creates a relationship between the drug and everyday life. Recovery means breaking both. I love you guys. I'll see you for the next one. We're going to talk about the big one, cannabis, also known as weed. I love you guys.